Hi, this is Jordi from Agents at Work, and today we are talking with Thorsten from Sourcegraph. Hi, Thorsten.
Hey Jordi, nice to be here.
Same. I was really excited because I talked to you on Twitter a couple of days ago. That's one of the magic of Twitter or X, and that you have, like everyone there. I was looking for a new guest, and you just actually like offer yourself, not for this podcast, but in general. Like if anyone wants to discuss about AI agents, I am open to be a guest. And I was like, yeah, I already follow you for many, many years. You wrote two beautiful books about writing compilers and interpreters in Go. It was like they gave me like many hours of fun, so thank you very much for that. And I also read from X.com that you are back to Sourcegraph after 1 year in another company, in Z editor. So, what's your relation with agents? But before we go there, I would like to start, as we always do, asking you, what do you think that an AI agent is?
Good question. I think I'm going to go with the broadest possible answer. I think for me, an AI agent is an a large language model with access to tools, meaning with the ability to modify something outside of the context window. That's it for me. Yeah. It's not, I know there's a lot of, about workflows and whatnot, but I think it's agent to me means it gets some input and then decides based on that input what tool should I use, or if it should use a tool at all, and then uses that tool and then either waits for more input or is done or something. That to me is an agent.
I think that's something that we're going to like keep discovering as everyone else is doing in the next months in
Yeah.
AI. Is this idea that people are now tying it to a set of tools? And I think that I myself, like, I don't have a set of tools, but I'm able to do like quite a lot of tasks because I am able to like learn about them and use them. So right
Yeah.
now, agents, they say like, well, it's this LLM that has these tools. And I think that we're going to bit a bit moves and like, well, it's something that is able to use tools, and it just like grabs whatever it's needed
Yeah.
every time. Of course, like we want to sandbox them and have them like some nice word rails there, because as humans, we also don't want them to be able to do everything.
Yeah.
Like when a new employee joins a company.
I think
Um,
there's I think there's a lot of things that are now being done with agents at even at Sourcegraph, like not what I'm working on, but what other people are doing now is they're building agents. And like if you squint and you think back a few years ago, there's a lot of this where you would think it's just a CI pipeline or an if this then that or some other workflow automation tool. But I think the crucial bit is that, in air quotes, the model decides, what inputs to give which tool. And that I think is the super interesting part of this.
for first time, we're able to embed intelligence at the edge. So you actually just
Yeah.
put there like, here is intelligence. I'm not marking what it needs to do. Like there is intelligence and it can route it.
Yeah.
That's something that before AI we could not do, and
Yeah.
feels pretty magical. Right now, like 5 years ago, if you asked me if we are going to be able to speak to computers, I would say no. There was
Yeah.
something called Dragon Speaker or something like that when I was
Yeah.
2010 or something like that. That just like help with the speech recognition, and now we're actually like they are replying back. The machines are replying
Yeah.
back and meaningful things. So it really feels magical. For people that don't know about Sourcegraph, you have been there for many years before, even
Yeah.
if there was a break in the middle. So when you started, how was Sourcegraph there, and then what changed there? Like, why are they adopting AI, and how are they adopting it?
hmm that's a really good question. Um, I'll let me make sure. Sorry, I
Oh,
just got to stop my backup so the bandwidth isn't being dropped.
yeah.
Um, so when I joined, this was in 2019. This was when the first time I joined Sourcegraph. It was a code search company, and the idea being you have a lot of code, you want to search through it. That's what Sourcegraph does. It has a platform, you put code in it, it allows you to search code. And then I was there for 4.5 years, and we've grown and grown and grown a lot, and we've gotten big customers. And turns out, there's companies that have 50,000 repositories or 100,000 repositories or 200 or 300,000 repositories, and they need code search. You need to search through that code. And I think then with the rise of AI, or, the big bang that was ChatGPT, or even, slightly before that, like once GPT-3 came out and whatnot, I think what the founders of the company, Quinn and Byung, realized is that, and it took me a while to realize this, is that people aren't, when they use code search, what they're interested in is not to use the interface in which you put in a regex or a search term. What they're actually interested in is surfacing the relevant bits of code or finding an answer to the question that you have, right? Like that sounds super abstract, but if you think about it, the interface of code search, of grab or Sourcegraph or whatever else, it's just one way to get to the answer that you're looking for. And I think Byung and Quinn, they realized this really early on, and I think it took the company a long time to catch up with that idea. And I think I now was a year at Zed, and I worked on, beautiful client-side application, text editor Zed, and I saw software from a completely different point of view. And even at Zed, I worked on the AI team towards the end, and I helped build the inline completion feature that Zed now has, which is, equivalent or similar to cursor tab, where you have like next position prediction and whatnot. And while working on this, we did fine-tuning, we built up our data set, all of this, and I got to know LLMs, pretty well, or much more so than I did before. And now I had this practical application of stuff versus, 1.5 years ago, oh, you all should learn ML, you all should learn AI. And I couldn't get into it. But then while I was doing the fine-tuning and looking at the data and using the LLMs to test other LLMs or generate data for other LLMs or turning the temperature up and down, stuff like this, I realized that, oh my God, like this is, like you said, it's or how I describe it is always the fuzzy to non-fuzzy adapter, where suddenly we now have this thing in a computer that can take fuzzy stuff and possibly turn it into non-fuzzy answers, right? And that's incredibly powerful. And at the same time, you see stuff becomes cheaper and faster, and it's, more cost efficient whatsoever. So that was kind of like my detour. So now I'm back at Sourcegraph because while working on AI, I realized that again and again, the most important bit is the information you put in the context window. And who's better positioned to do this than Sourcegraph? They have all of your code indexed. They know how to traverse it. They know how to surface it. So I, before I left that, I actually interviewed at a bunch of different companies and then went back to Sourcegraph because I realized, I talked to Quinn and he sees it the same way that I see it, which is that this stuff has a ton of potential. And I think he also agrees with me when I say Sourcegraph is not a code search company anymore. Sourcegraph's job is to surface answers to questions, and the search UI is just one way to do it. But another way to do it is to use LLMs and turn the fuzzy, meaning how do we do this? We're an out code base, blah, 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 into non-fuzzy, query information or whatever, or search retrieval, and then surface that information to the user. And like, there was a talk, I think it was, I don't know what, like say 2 months back, by Eric Meyer, I think is his name, and he was a director of engineering at Facebook, and he left, and I think he's pretty well known in like functional programming circles and whatnot, and you know him, yeah, and he tweeted yesterday even, after the Claude 3.5 release with the Claude CLI tool, and he posted a link to the minified JavaScript version of the Claude CLI tool, and he said like, oh, like a lot of knowledge workers have not realized yet that their jobs can be done with a few hundred lines of minified JavaScript. And in some sense, I think it's, it's a little bit a troll thing to say, right? People get, riled up about it. But I think what he realized, and he he's the programmer's programmer. Like, that guy wrote more smart code than a lot of other programmers. And I think he's also seen the same thing. Like, he's seen that this is just the beginning. We now have these tools that can write a lot of code, and that changes stuff. And what I wanted to say is that, this is the background on him. Like, he's seeing the potential of AI. And a few weeks back, he gave a talk at Facebook, and he was saying, like, why search for code if you can have the LLM write it for you? Like, why search for, say, how do I do a React component to render the current date? Something like this. Why search for this and find another example and then adapt it to your needs when we now have LLMs that could basically find that code for you and then write you the thing for you that you're looking for? And I think that way of phrasing it really verbalizes what made it click for me. It's not about search. It's not about the UI. It's about the platform and being able to query the code that you have indexed, and then the UI can be searched. There's a lot of valid use cases for search, but another UI, another interface is to use an LLM for that. And then you give it the power of, being able to retrieve code and walk the code graph. And suddenly other problems that might be hard to solve or that have been hard to solve are now solved by the LLM. So that's the shorter version. I mean, it can go on and on, but I think, and it's hard to verbalize this, but for me, it's this. The way I described it to my now again coworkers is that I basically went around the block and now look at the same thing from a different point of view, and I now see that what you want to have when you build AI applications, when you build developer tooling, is a platform that has all of your code indexed and that you can query and find the best context for a given query whatsoever, and then give it to the LLM.
I think that most of the people didn't realize yet, but what you said is really, really insightful, because it's this idea that, well, if you have intelligence, we don't have intelligence for one thing. We have like pattern matching, and then it can do a lot.
Yeah.
So it can like find the right code. But the same tool or tweaked can say like, well, now not only that, like use it with my data. And then there is a lot of code that it's pattern matching. Like I go, I see examples, I read the documentation, and it's like, okay, now that I saw with this random example, how can I adapt it to my code? And then I'm able to do that. And sometimes it's like, well, but it also needs to match not only with the documentation, but with context from your code base. It's like, well, the same intelligence can also do that. So many people are thinking on, from their point of view, like I can automate my edges. And what they don't see is that they can keep stacking stuff. And there is something that I really like Quinn from Twitter. I have been like following him for a long, long time too. And I find many of his takes also really, really insightful. And I really like, because I heard him talking since the beginning. So like, well, of course the product is like search and indexer, no? Like we index code bases, but we are a semantic layer on top. So it's not like you ask me what kind of thing you want to find or exactly how it is expressed. You tell me what kind of thing, and we're going to be able to surface it. And now that there is intelligence there, they're going to say like, well, tell me like, why are you surfacing the stuff? And I may even be able to apply it. And there is something that I discuss with people from Grok, with Q, and also Cerberus. And I think that even engineers are not thinking about this. Like when you are able to have intelligence and have tokens so fast, most of the people imagine, and they are using it right now, to do the same thing but faster. So they say like, well, I am in the loop, I'm a human, and I am able to, write something, and in 15 seconds, I do what before took me like 1 minute. But I like to think always about second order effects. And there is this idea of, well, what's the biggest or largest code base that humans worked on? And I usually think like maybe like Linux. We put a lot of brain power there from many people. So that's the largest kind of software code that we ever had. We had to develop some stuff even for working on that, like Git. Linux was like, well, we need something for this kind of thing that didn't exist before. And I think that the same is going to happen, because pretty soon we may be able, if the intelligence doesn't diverge. So right now the problem is like it outputs tokens really, really fast, but it kind of loses track of what it's doing. But we may be able to one day just turn a machine that it's not even like a supercomputer, but something that it's a commodity. And after 1 week, you have a code base that iterated long enough to be like the largest one made for humans ever.
Yeah.
Tools like Sourcegraph are really, really well positioned to be useful in that world. And I think that that's where the world is moving to. So this
Yeah.
idea of right now you have Sourcegraph that many people don't understand because they say like, well, I have a Django app with really little, like I don't know, like 200 views. Why do I need indexing? Like the LSP can already like jump me around. Then there are companies like Google or Google Size that it's like, well, we need something like Sourcegraph. Then there are people like Facebook who created Glean internally
Yeah.
for this stuff because they said, well, this is a problem, guys. But was a problem that, well, you need so many developers or so much brain power into the code that it was not a really extended problem. We are going to have now that problem to the power of 100 because machines are going to be the ones generating it.
Yeah.
Um,
I I agree. I think there's, talking about blind spots and like second order effects, I think I don't know, three things if I can get them together in my head. One is I see engineers still make the same as they did 2 years ago, which was they would open ChatGPT and they throw some code at it and go fix this. And that doesn't work. It hasn't worked back then and it still doesn't work. What these things are is, I mean, I might be wrong, but for me, the most important bit about LLMs and code is that they're really good at text. Sure, they're getting better at video and images too, but it's this they're good at manipulating text. And what is it that we do as programmers? And I think you need to kind of move the expectations down from all-seeing oracle that you can throw stuff at it and it just guesses what you want to do to, okay, like I now have like this weird black box in which I can throw like some things that I know are true and some requests to change something and out comes something else. And the better you get at knowing what pieces you have to throw in the black box to predict what comes out of it, and the more results you will get from this. And I think it's kind of about expectations, how you treat this. And then combine this, that means, the expectations, people use the tools in the wrong way, and that means they get the wrong results and they also have the wrong expectations and they might not get the full value out of it. And the second thing is, talking about Grok and Cerebras, people now say, or Grok and Cerebras, I think that here the point is performance, and people don't see this. They think, well, I waited, 5 seconds for Copilot to show me something and it came back and was wrong, right? What if this wasn't 5 seconds, but if it was 50 milliseconds or something else, right? Then you wouldn't be mad because you didn't wait at all, right? And people don't see this curve. They don't see the stuff get faster. But there was this prototype a couple months back of, I think it was called Cerebras Coder. The Steve from Valtown built it. And it was, I think, Llama 70B hosted on Cerebras and like a code gen thing for front end stuff. And you would type a prompt in and say, write me a snake game or Pong game, and it would come back in a second. And sometimes it would miss, and sometimes it would do the wrong thing. But what clicked for me was, look, if this only takes a second, it doesn't matter that it got it wrong. I can just spam the retry key for 10 seconds, and then one of the 10 will probably be correct, right? And so that's another thing that people miss, that performance only goes up with these things. And sure, we might hit diminishing returns at some point, but I think, this will happen, or at least we're in this. Like, it's getting faster. It's already much faster than it was last year. And the third blind spot, which you alluded to, is combine all of these. Like, combine, LLMs are really good at text, are really good at generating code. And they might not get it 100%, but performance might get faster. So it doesn't really matter because you can retry. And, judging by Claude 3.7 that came out yesterday or 2 days ago, they are getting better at this stuff, right? The code that Claude 3.7 writes is better than what we got from ChatGPT, GPT 3 or 4 even. So that means combine these two. I think they are too powerful to not incorporate them in your workflow. And that means that I think the world of code, or the way we write code in, say, 2 years, will look different than it looked 2 years ago. And I think people make the mistake of thinking, oh, it cannot do this in my code base, so it's not useful to me, right? But the mistake is thinking the code base has to stay this way, right? Because the code base was organized this way for people to work in. And if you look at Google, like you mentioned, Facebook, they built their code bases based, from first principles on the idea of there's, I don't know how many, like 20,000 engineers committing to this every day, right? It looks completely different than the code bases you and I work in. So now if we bring AI into the loop, what will the code base look like then, right? And will that make it easier? Will we change the code base to make it easier to work with AI, or to get more results from AI? Concrete example, I mean, obviously we're in the bubble here, but I wrote a blog post, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, newsletter post, where I was kind of speculating like how might AI change programming. And one thing I put in there was, I think we might start to see, readmes, but for LLMs, like the context.txt, or I think context.md, I called it, right?
Yeah.
And I said this like 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. And now last week I've been seeing it everywhere on Twitter, where people are saying, here's the LLM.txt, here's the, Claude calls it Claude MD. That came out yesterday. Like, they summarize your code base and put it in a Claude MD file, so that then later on, when you want to pick up what you were working on, you can just put that file into context window again. So I think you and I and others, I think the difference between people being excited about what's happening and maybe being like, oh, it doesn't work for me, is that, I mean, broad strokes here, but I think the difference is that maybe we've seen the trajectory, like we've seen a bigger part of the curve and we can see where it's headed, versus just a snapshot in time of what it is right now.
Yes. So there is a lot of stuff that you just unpacked there.
Yeah,
One
sorry.
thing that no, it's good. It's good. David from Omni, that was our last speaker in the previous
Yeah.
episode, said, and now I have been repeating for quite a lot. It's this idea of don't bet against the models, because they are getting like
Yes.
better, faster, and
Yes.
cheaper.
Yes.
1 year ago, with Paul, one coworker, we built something called Talk to APIs. So what's this idea of, well, it's really good at text. It can generate code if you execute it. It doesn't have to be in a copilot. It can be like a one-off script. So the theory
Yeah.
was like, well, until now we automated a lot of stuff when it was repetitive enough. We are going to be able to automate stuff that is not repetitive at all, because the cost is so cheap, as you said, like with performance, that it's like
Yeah.
instantly second. Even what you said about, well, you can just keep it to keep repeating in the loop, say
Yeah.
like, okay,
Just hit retry. Yeah.
it can be like embedded inside, like say like, listen,
Yes.
you're going to reply in 1 minute, but you're going to iterate like one. It's a bit like that joke or meme from Doctor Strange that says like, I have
Yeah.
seen I don't know how many
Yeah.
universes.
Yeah.
It's going to be like that, but for humans, like it just comes and say like, this is the solution. You're like, wow, at the first try, that's so good. And it's like, well, it's not the first try. Like,
Yeah.
meanwhile you were blinking, I already executed all these like multiple times. I think that
Yes.
languages may also have to change a bit, because now many things that were acceptable for people, like loading environments and how long it takes to, like boot up something in a sandbox
Yes.
for trying it, it may be it may change. Something that
Yes.
we noticed pretty quickly was how our code base changed with LLMs. Like we adopted it like really quickly. It was the first time that I changed my editor since like before university. Like I was using Vim and NeoVim later. I was like, well, it's everything, like this is like the best tool ever. Then I saw
Yeah.
LLMs with Cursor, and I was like, okay, I need to switch. Like this is a new
Yeah.
world. It doesn't matter that, oh, I am faster at, like with less
Yeah.
keystrokes. Like it's just a new world.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
people need to catch up with this. Like for me, it was like really like, it's like when someone passes away. Like it was a
Yeah.
tool. I've been using it so much, but clearly something has changed.
Yes.
And with the code bases, something that we notice is like a lot of the patterns that humans use to structure code in a way that works for the human. So, for example, separating concerns on different files, because we have a really limited context window. So if you put too much in my screen, it doesn't help me. Like I Stack Overflow. It's like, damn it, like there is too much things here that are unrelated. I am confused. However, with LLMs, actually what helps quite a lot is to have like all the context, and they are able to hold more at once. So a lot of these files that were split, we started mixing them, and we saw that the LLM improved quite a lot. So these
Yes.
ideas of having the types in one place and then the usage in another, that was something that it was like, no. It has to be with the view. Like, I want it exactly next to where it's used. And then we saw an increase of, like tens of percent
Yeah.
only on these small changes. So for sure it's going to change. Now
It
we're
is. Yeah.
still just changing it as adapting what we have with cursors. Like, well, we already have all this code base. How does the tool look like? And I haven't seen people trying to be visionary as you did in your blog, in your post, saying
Yeah.
like, well, guys, like this is a new thing. So maybe it's worth imagining if we had to rebuild it today, how would it look like? Not for trashing what we have, but maybe to see, well, how would it be? So we are not
Yeah.
boxed on,
Yeah.
what we
It
have done before.
there, just on the Vim thing. I think I'm basically saying this for you to agree, but for the audience. So I used Vim for so long. I don't know, 15 years. I have 2 Vim t-shirts. I have a Vim cup, like, Vim guy. And then I switched to Zed. I worked at Zed and switched before working at Zed. It has a fantastic Vim mode, and shout out to Conrad if he's listening to this. But then I worked on inline completion at Zed, and I also played around a lot with cursor and cursor tab. And what clicked for me was I'm I would say I'm pretty good at Vim. Like, I can write some complicated macros. I'm pretty fast at it. I can do a lot of stuff in Vim. But then I used cursor for the first time, and you would put, debug statements in or something. Like, say you have a switch statement and you have like 15 branches, and you want to debug something, so you put a log statement in all of the branches. And in Vim, I can write you a macro to do this. I can copy the name, that the thing that we're switching on, blah blah blah, and put it in all of the branches, and then repeat it. And I can even spell it out how I would write the macro. But then when you use cursor, you realize, oh, the model already knows. Like, you typed in console log, and then it knows you probably want to add it to this. And because they're so fast, like, even if it gets it wrong, you just type 4 more characters, and then you go tap, 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 and then you add then you have the rest in there. And like, to that point that I made earlier, it doesn't have to be AGI to be useful. It can just be a mechanical helper in that sense, right? And this is, orthogonal to what we were talking about, but I think there's this belief of, the hardcore Vim or the hardcore Emacs users whatsoever that this does this stuff, like, I want to write my code by hand and blah, blah, blah. But yet they use, fuzzy finding, or they use other stuff, or they use navigation and language service and whatnot. And yes, there are people who wrote me emails saying, I don't use any of that, whatever, like special species of programmers, right? But the models, like, imagine you can run these models on your own machine, and they're really, really fast, and you get like these completion in 50 millis or 20 millis, right? That's crazy useful, right? So that's the one thing, like, on the on Vim. And then the other thing is, yeah, I don't know, like, it's people underestimate how once you've seen this, like, once you've seen the light, to say, and see how useful it's become, people underestimate how much you might change your way you approach program, like you said, to make this show up more often. And to your point, I'm right now working in Svelte, first time in my life that I'm using it. And you have these components, and the component has TypeScript, it has the, I don't know what they call it, it's not JSX, I guess it's JSX, and then you have the CSS it's all in one file. And you give this component to the LLM and you say modify this, and it has all of the context and it can easily do this, and then you add a feedback loop and you give it like, here's the linter errors, or here's like even the screenshot of what it looks like now, and you're off to races. And I think once you've experienced this, then like you said, like the fast feedback loop, like how can the LLM, or how can you and the LLM verify that what it did worked, like that will become even more important, because then you want to do this more often, and it should go on for longer. So
Yeah, right now the bottleneck it's already me, and
yeah
it's a really like a humble situation because it humbles you. Like there's a
yeah
lot of stuff that and then you go to places and say, "Wow, these developers don't know that," and then after many years, say, "Well, there's value here," and then
yeah
one day it just drops, and it's like, "Wow, that knowledge now it's useful, but everyone has it." So I think
yeah
that's going to be hard for many developers because
yeah
for them it was like, well, I know how to do all these macros. And a really good example, like of how it changes what kind of tools you use. At work
yeah
now, today someone said like, I think that we should switch from makefiles to some tool called Just that I have never seen. Um,
yeah
5 years ago, I would have said like, listen, I don't care what it is. And he's like, no, it's faster, it's in Rust, it's better syntax. I was like, everyone knows Makefile. Like it's gonna be really hard to change that. Because of LLMs, I'm happy to switch actually, because even if LLMs are better trained at makefiles, they are becoming
yeah
smart enough that I'm going to be able to just load the documentation. And then syntax, it's not anymore a problem only for me. So of course,
yes
like it cannot be like random stuff, that I cannot be like brain fuck language where it's
yes
like, well, I cannot read this. But if it's a YAML or a TOML or a JSON or makefile, I don't care anymore. Like the LLM helps me with it. So
That,
I think that we're going to see a lot of this.
I'll take this as a volley here, because if I'm not making this up, I swear I'm not making this up. A friend of mine sent me a text message. I'm looking this up. It was, I think it was, let's see, like 3 hours ago, like before he went to lunch. He sent me a message that I was sending him a message. It's like, oh, Claude 3.7 just did this for me, and he's like, yeah, well, here I'm still running into problems. And he sent me a screenshot, and he told Claude, like, can you add this script to the just file, which is exactly right, like just that task runner you're talking about. And you can see, Claude, it tried to find a file, it didn't find it, blah blah blah. But it made me think again that there's now a much higher barrier for tools to be adopted, because if the LLM doesn't know about it, like I would have bet that if he had used make, that conversation with Claude would have gone a different way, right? Because Claude knows make files obviously a lot better than just files, because there's more make in the world. So yes, on one hand, it's easier to adopt other stuff. On the other hand, there's like this local maximum in which we're trapped, or might be trapped, where somebody said about Zig, the language, like, how do you plan for adoption to increase if you keep making breaking changes, and basically everything the models know gets outdated, and the models are one of the main ways with which people learn new program languages. So it's
Yeah.
super interesting.
Yeah. My bet here is like right now it makes sense to use whatever it's most used. For example, React.
Yes.
But I think that the main blockage right now, it's not even the model that has been trained with make and not just. It's a lot of not being able to bring the context.
Yeah.
Because with these machines, if I give them, like here's the documentation of
Yeah.
just, they are able to nail it at once.
They nail it.
And
Yeah.
actually, this is something that I wonder about Sourcegraph. So right now, Sourcegraph it's about like indexing and bringing the semantics of the code. What about the
Yeah.
documentation? It's something that you plan to expand, because right now, like before, it made sense because indexing text was different
Yeah.
from indexing code.
I know.
But now you actually have a really good set as well. It's all about patterns.
Yeah.
Are you
I
working on something like this?
I don't think right now. I'm working on, the Gentic chat, or Gentic, editing experience, whatever you want to call it. But I'm basically so full of this urgency or energy where I say, no, we have to build this. Like, we have to also build this. We have to build this, because I think you get this when I say that I think previously people thought of the interface of Sourcegraph to be for humans. But I think now the best interface would be text, where you can just say, Sourcegraph, give me all of the documentation for these two libraries that are in this component or whatever. Boom, give me a text file. Like, people would use this a lot just to put that stuff in their context window. So I want to build all of this, but we do have, limited time and limited resources, and we're trying our hardest, but yeah.
It makes sense. And you don't have to be like the most innovative all the time. Like, you can be the most innovative in the things that you're working on.
Yeah.
And then when these things and patterns start catching up, like, I am 100% sure that you're like really, really well positioned to take advantage of this. So this idea of I have the documentation in one place, so I read it and then I can edit it in my editor, this is going to disappear very, very quickly. So I think that with AIs, like, something that people still need to understand is that the app is not going to be consumed from the web app or from an editor. It's going to be consumed from everywhere. So a really simple example. Right now, people are creating code in Cursor that then they execute. So what we were talking about, these one-off tasks, that means that I want to be able to create one-off tasks, so code that gets executed only for doing one thing, from my Apple Intelligence. Like, I want to be driving and I want to say, listen, I need something with my calendar. It's like, oh, damn it, I am driving. If I was in Cursor instead of Apple Intelligence, I would be able to, one prompt it and execute it. Okay, if that's possible, that means that you don't need to be in your editor. Like, we just add this extra step. And I think that right now, Sourcegraph has been like really focusing on, well, the developer experience, as there is a developer in an editor or in some kind of UI where you are able to see the text and then you make the changes and it ends up there because the execution, the building happens somewhere else.
Yes.
But again, I think that you are really, really well positioned to actually capture all this idea of saying, like, well, the builders are all over the world. They are talking to their phones. They are in their laptops, but not in the editor. They are in the ChatGPT app, in the Claude. Yeah. Actually, the code needs to be searched and edited, not only in your editor, but from all over the place. And this happens with everyone. This is going to happen with e-commerce. People are going to purchase everything, not from your website. Your SaaS is going to be consumed from everywhere. And I think that even when I talk with a lot of clients, they are still thinking that, no, they are going to come to my website to purchase my stuff or to use my SaaS. No. And MCP started showing people, okay, wait a second, I can package this and it can be consumed from everywhere. So I am really, really excited to see things that Sourcegraph built for really, really big teams, that there were, like, it was a pressuring problem that was not that extended. So it was really, really valuable for the amount of people that had, that amount of code. Yeah. Now that's going to be multiplied in value because there's going to be like solo developers that become users of Sourcegraph, saying like, "Wow, I have so much code." Yeah. So let's see how that happens.
What you will also like. I'm talking mostly, about programmers here who they open a large code base, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 files, and they throw it at whatever, and they say it didn't work for me. And fair enough, I don't think it works for those code bases, like with like a naive approach. But what I went through was when talking about the phone experience, I went through the fine tuning, and it was a lot of text manipulation and scripts, and and what I ended up doing was you use Claude or whatever else, and you say, write me a script to take all of these files and take this out and put this in here and do this and put it in here and blah blah blah, and it would spit you out a 200-line JavaScript, Python, Ruby, whatever, Go, and it would work perfectly on first try because it was such a clearly scoped small thing. And then you're like, it works, it did the job, and 200 lines of code that would have taken me an hour, I did this in a minute or something, or 2 minutes, or maybe like 5 even. And I sat there and I thought, oh, code has become cheap. Like, this would have taken me an hour and less even, but still, I don't even know what's in there anymore. I don't care how this is formatted. I don't really care. All I care about is that, going back to your phone example, all I care about is that it does what I told it to do, and then possibly that I can pick up that context again at a later date and then say, okay, now change it to this. But what the code looks like and how this is stored, I really don't care. Like, all I care about is that conversation and how the code was made. And basically, I want to store the prompt along with the code. And then so later on, I can pick it up, which is kind of what you want when you talk to Siri or whatever, and you say, write me a script to do this, or blah, 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 do this on your own. And then 15 minutes later, you go, actually modify this to make the color red or something. Like, that's what you care about, right? You want to solve the problem by giving the computer the direction, and you don't care about how is the code stored, is the stuff white space aligned and whatnot. And yeah, I agree with you. I think there will be more code and it will look different than it does right now. And yes, I am, blue-eyed and naive here. And yes, this won't work maybe for the large-scale engineering projects and whatnot, but I do think there's a shift going on and this will happen. And just to add one more, I don't know, lens to this, the people... The way I also think about it is, if you now have a button that can generate code in 500 milliseconds or a second, and it spits out perfectly working, 300 line scripts, or talking to your phone, this has to change stuff the same way that, WordPress changed how you do personal websites. Like, why would you build a personal website for your hairdresser now if you have WordPress? You wouldn't, right? And I think this devalued, personal website. It doesn't mean that, we don't have personal websites anymore. We all use WordPress, but it certainly made other stuff cheaper. And I think, I don't know, this fact that generating certain kinds of code has become incredibly cheap is going to have an explosive effect. And yeah, I'll stop here. I'll go, babbling on, but yeah.
It's good. It's good. Also, there is a lot of people that now are matching the patterns, saying like, well, how do humans do it? And then you apply to the LLM, and then you see like an increase on the stats, like the kind of context that you have. Oh, I read the documentation and it just works. Something that I am missing is actually people like augmenting the things that humans are not doing now because we are bad. So a really simple example. In Neobeam, everyone has this git blame. So you are able at each line just see when was this edited. And you say like, well, there is value here because, like sometimes I want to see who changed this, when it was. But of course, you say like, well, why don't you see all the diff every time with git blame? I say, well, that could like break my context window, like the one in my brain. Like it could be too much information. Yes. However, for LLMs, it's like, well, 3 lines more of code, like a couple thousand of tokens, we good. Include it every time. Same like, how many people are reading now logs? And I am really, really surprised that nobody went viral yet. Creating a tool that goes through all your commits and actually rewrites them, expanding the commit message. Sorry, so it doesn't rewrite the code, only the code, the coding message. Yeah. Well, now all this is information that the LLMs are going to be able to use when modifying stuff. Yeah. So, like there are a lot of stuff that can be done. And I think that it's just like, well, there's so many new stuff, as you said, that it's hard to focus. But
to that point,
change everything.
To that point on commit messages, I think another jump you can make mentally is right now, everybody thinks about LLMs and commit messages. They generate them and then you commit them and the message is done. But again, say we project a little bit into the future and LLMs are 10 times faster and cheaper. Why commit the message if you can just generate it on the fly, right? Like you could say, if we have enough, the context window is big enough, then you could have, instead of reading the commit message, which yes, it's valuable that it's a snapshot or a point in time, sure, but say you could take 10 commits, the surrounding 10 commits of a given commit, and then ask the LLM, along with the pull request and all of the review comments, to say, explain this commit to me. And then it comes up with the commit message, taking all this other stuff into account. And if that takes a second, why would you do the other thing, right? So.
And also something that is curious here that I think that it's counterintuitive is that when you ask the LLM to write a commit, it comes up with a commit really similar to what a human will write for
Yes.
commits that were used for human. So actually, I think that people should not ask the LLM write a commit, and it's a feature that everyone is asking them. And it should be like, no, no, guys, like let's put another kind of prompt saying like, give me a summary or something like that. So it doesn't match the pattern of commits that were for humans in human time. But again, I think that we're just like a bit ahead of the curve. So I'm really happy to have this conversation with you because I see that you can clearly see where things are going.
Yeah, I had that same thing this morning. I had it write some code, and basically it was about scrolling behavior, and you would scroll through viewport, and then it would detect when you're at the bottom. So then when you're at the bottom, it would auto follow new stuff that shows up, right? Like you can see in a lot of the chat applications. And in the code, it did this, one shot at this, Claude 3.7. And in the code, it put a comment in above one line where it basically, the line was, it was like, at bottom, like a Boolean. And then it would basically say, where are we in the scroll position? And it put like a buffer in of 50 pixels. And it's this, yes, as a human, like what made me smile was a junior engineer wouldn't have put the comment in, but a senior engineer would go like, this is a magic number here, like the 50 pixels. I got to explain myself. So I'm going to put a commit here and say, we're going to give some variance, like within 50 pixels, we mark it as we've reached the bottom of the window. And the LLM put this in, and it was this moment of, where does this come from and who is this for? Like, what's happening here? It's kind of emulating a senior engineer because it thinks it acts like, or it acts like it is a senior engineer for other senior engineers to read this code. And in my mind, I was like, I'm not reading this, like you wrote this code. I don't care. But yeah, there's still the human remains in all of this. But I think there'll be a point where, we go off the cliff, I guess, and that stops.
Perfect. So I enjoyed this call, and I think that we are on time.
Yeah.
You need to jump to something else. You need to make a Sourcegraph better, thing that I really appreciate. So how can people learn more about you? What kind of books should they purchase? And like, where can they find you?
Yeah. So you can find me. I'm on Twitter, Blue Sky, Thorsten Ball. I have my personal website, my blog, thorstenball.com. I write a weekly newsletter called Register Spill, which if you're interested in programming for, say programming's sake, or if you're interested in, I don't know, technology for love of the game, that's what people say. Then you should subscribe. I put out, weekly posts at least, and then sometimes it's mostly interesting links and stuff that I find around the web. And other times I write little essays or little things, and people seem to really enjoy it.
Excellent.
And yeah,
I will make sure to add that to the description of the podcast so people can just like click in one place and see it. And LLMs in the future, when they're crawling the web, they also know where to find more.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Hoping to have
Thank you. Thanks for having me, man.
This was see how much the world has changed.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.